Enter Paul the gym leader. Paul, everybody's favorite grouch of a rival, named Shinji in the Japanese version after longtime anime composer Shinji Miyazaki. First teased in a promotional image back in mid-2006, the initial thought of the character was he might be the new companion replacing Brock, as by that time we had not gotten confirmation of Brock's return. But oh, were we in for a surprise? Nah, not Paul being a rival. That was the second widely held speculation of the time. It's how much of a rival he was going to be and the impact he would have in Anime as a whole. No rival has been able to surpass Paul since, period. And why is that? Well, Paul as a character was the total opposite of Ash. The way he approached training with harsh methods, with the end goal always being obtaining power. While with Ash, it's always been about the potential you can release through your friendship with Pokemon. Paul was very distant and harsh with his Pokemon, calling them out for their failures and sometimes outright getting rid of bad performers, all because they didn't meet his expectations. The whole story and development of Chimchar being the core representation of this in the show. Chimchar simply was not compatible with Paul, but he was with Ash. Chimchar needed emotional support, not just tough training, to bring out his full potential. And that's how Paul mainly operated his training. Tough and rigorous, intense, and his methods did work and delivered powerful results. Torterra, Electivire, and Ursaring are examples of this. People like Cynthia and Brandon even recognized the strength and potential of Paul's Pokemon. So what the Grouch did actually worked, but it wasn't the definitive answer. Paul also had a bit of a nasty attitude, especially towards Ash, and he was exceptionally harsh towards gym leader Maylene after defeating her, basically throwing her out of her groove, which led to her doubting her capabilities as a gym leader. It should be noted though, he would listen and treat with a level of decency and sometimes respect those he felt were knowledgeable and experienced like Cynthia. Even his interactions with Brock showed he had a level of recognition for Brock's knowledge, while with Ash and Dawn he was a flat-out jerk. But the more Paul interacted with Ash, especially after his loss to Brandon, the more he started to mellow out. Most of Paul's core motivation came from the Pyramid King himself, after witnessing him defeat his brother in battle. Reggie had a fairly fruitful career as a trainer, having competed in 4 regional conferences and defeated most of the Kanto Battle Frontier by the time he reached Brandon. The opportunity to be a frontier brain himself on the line if he won that battle. But Reggie didn't win that battle, and how Reggie walked away from it all left a lasting impression on Paul, who basically vowed he wouldn't show the same weakness as his brother. When Paul battled Brandon, he was basically driven by emotion, frustration. When Brandon noticed, obviously, Paul lost, and Brandon remarked that they had a good battle, but he would look forward to battling a more calm and level-headed Paul, one that wasn't driven by such emotions in the future. Towards the end of Diamond and Pearl, Paul shows that aforementioned decency and level of respect to basically everyone, even going as far as thanking his Pokemon for their efforts in battle, something the Paul we knew at the start would have never done and seen as a weakness. This carries over to his appearance in Pokemon Journeys as well. Despite carrying himself in a bit of a distant manner, he retained the growth seen in Diamond and Pearl. I also think he showed that calmness Brandon referred to when he faced Ash at Oak's lab. Also, having recently rewatched all of his Diamond and Pearl episodes and finalizing it with his Journey's appearance, I think his overall character journey flows seamlessly. So this basically summarizes the Grouch rival himself as a character. Now on to the core topic. When Paul is leaving at the end of Pokemon Journeys episode 114, Professor Oak mentions the Grouch has been selected to become a gym leader, and this mere comment threw the Anime fandom into debate. So, does this make sense? Does this work for the character? Personally, I think yes, and here is why. First, let's take a look at the origins and role of the character. His design is obviously based on Silver, the rival of the Johto games, particularly Silver's gold, silver, and crystal design. Silver in the games goes through his own growth as a person, initially just believing the use of Pokemon being their power and not the bond that could be forged with them, but eventually turning around on the idea and accepting it in the end. But there's another character I think also has his parallels with Paul. Oak Boy from the Kanto game, and I don't care if it's green or blue, I'm referring to him as Oak Boy. Oh, but Alsacia, isn't that basically Gary? Yeah, and to that I say duh. See, here's the thing. Ash and Gary's rivalry through most of its run wasn't that profound. Nowhere to the level of Ash and Paul. Paul confronted Ash and got him to doubt himself and his methods. Literally confronted him multiple times, battled multiple times. As hilarious and as charismatic as I think Gary was in the original series, Gary was more of a tease to Ash. Gary's end impact on Ash wasn't like Oak Boy was to Red in the game. Paul's impact on Ash was more similar to Oak Boy and Red in the game. And what was Oak Boy's endgame? Oh yeah, he became a gym leader. And one huge diversion from the games was Gary's endgame and him becoming a researcher like his Gramps. This was a thing long before Paul was introduced. Also, the anime decided to take the direction of what's happened with Viridian Gym in an unexpected route that only Annie Pokey could do. They placed Agatha of the Kanto Elite Four, albeit temporary, in it. Remember, an Elite Four member, one of the region's strongest trainers, is now covering a gym. And we know Paul is really strong. By journeys, our Grouch is probably comparable to Agatha and other elites. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe even more. But then Alsacia, shouldn't he be an Elite Four member then? To that I say, maybe. We know from the game some Elite Four members held lower ranks before being promoted into a regional Elite Four. Koga being a gym leader and Kaylin being a frontier brain. I believe it's a role you most likely have to show that you're ready for. And the best entry point would be, I think, gym leader. Oh, but why not frontier brain? Ash was offered it, Reggie seemed interested in it, and Kaylin was promoted from it. Yeah, that makes sense. However, I think gym leader would be the bigger challenge for him as a character and would allow him to grow more overall. Here's what I mean. First off, gym leaders get more challengers than frontier brains. Battle Frontier challengers usually have to get scouted and invited in the anime. That's how Ash got in, and I remember Scott and Agatha had a small exchange about Scott scouting for challengers in the Seafoam Islands but not finding anyone. Bros, everyone and their dog knows about Pokemon Gym. These things are everywhere except Alola, and even Alola has a wannabe gym. So it makes sense for Paul to be placed in a role that would allow him more exposure to other trainers on a more consistent basis. Also, the gyms work closely with the leagues, which means there's a possible bridge there for more in the future, possible Elite Four spot, maybe even champion down the line. Personally, I think our Grouch has the potential for all that. Another reason for Paul being gym leader, karma. He will now have to put up with similar responsibilities as what Maylene has to deal with. This is a really good situation for his character to be growing from. To further expand on the topic, I took to Twitter and asked people their thoughts. A good career change, since not only is he a highly responsible and capable trainer, but his mindset on pushing trainers and Pokemon to their limits would be beneficial. My only hope is that his aspirations as a trainer doesn't end and still plans on aiming higher during his free time. This is one comment I wholeheartedly agree with. A gym leader is somebody who can have a huge impact on their opponent. And we know the huge impact Paul had on Ash through their travels in Sinnoh, as well as the impact he had on Maylene and also Barry. Paul's very strong approach to battling and how he does things like challenging the regional champion in a casual setting to test his strength, how he trained Torterra to take hits and then go on the offensive, calculating a battle to the point he is deciding moves based on what he knows the opponent will do next. Paul really leaves an impression, and I think challengers will be able to grow from their interactions with him. Now moving on to the topic of what type he would specialize in. Even though I personally think ground is the most suited considering the context there is to work with within the show, I did find the different responses interesting. Poison, I think, is a type that relies a lot on strategy, as it would rely a lot on the status condition. And strategy is something Paul excels at, so I will give you that. I think I can understand the thought behind Dark as well. Dark is not the most conventional typing to most people, and at first glance, neither is how Paul approaches things. Dark types can be a bit on the left field, and so can Paul. Every type. Technically, I mean, he is a very diverse trainer, and he seems to work well with most types of Pokemon, from how they fight to the different typing, but I don't think that would be a gym specifically. Now, what I think could be a thing is him mixing Pokemon that are in the specialty type into the team to catch people off guard. We've seen this before, like when Blaine used Rhydon in the original series. Another way this could work is him using other types that have attacks of the same typing the gym is centered on. But regardless, it's good to mix other types in there, especially types to cover the type advantage against whatever his gym's typing is. I feel like he's more frontier brain material than a gym leader. I'll be honest, this is actually what I expected to be the wider response, but it actually wasn't. But I can understand the sentiment. Frontier brains are comparable to elite ranked trainers in a way, and we know our Grouch has the talent for it. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, however, I think his growth benefits more from being a gym leader. Rip to his challengers. I mean, this person isn't wrong. This is why I'd expect his gym to be a higher caliber gym. There would probably be a requirement of how many prior badges you need to have before you challenge his gym. I'm thinking maybe 6 or 7. I'm kind of mixed on it. But hey, he'll be calling anybody who loses pathetic. I think it's true in a way. I feel like he'd call pathetic those opponents he knows have potential but are like wailing in self-pity after defeat, like in a way to rile them up, but he won't say it like he used to at the beginning of Diamond and Pearl. I think he's just gonna like tease or like motivate, you know, from that approach. I like it, and I headcanon that he is forced to share a gym with Mei Ling, though I wish he did beat Brandon. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I do like this idea. It would be extremely ironic and put him in an awkward position that he would definitely be forced to grow from. Also, I do agree, the Grouch needs to beat Brandon someday. Like it. I like how it shows Paul's character growth and how the show has the gym leaders change later in the story. Yep, I totally agree. It really adds not only to his growth, but to Annie Poke's continuity as a whole. It's one of those little details I feel make the show feel more organic, knowing positions are shifted around and passed on. It would be cool to see Paul become the new Viridian City gym leader. This is what I feel makes the most sense. Paul has enough ground type. They decide to make this decision basically when we were nearing the end game of the anime. This just makes way too much sense to not be the direction that they are considering. Also, we know of gym leaders in game canon that take over gyms in other regions, like Norman, who came from Johto, and Kabu, who came from Hoenn. Another thing to note is the Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh leagues seem to operate under the same league committee, not only because we kept seeing Charles Goodchild, the president, attend these respective league conferences, but also the gym inspector, Nurse Joy, from the Chronicles episode where Misty takes over the Cerulean gym. She mentions she is headed to Hoenn to continue her inspector work. Those 4 leagues, it's obvious that they are connected to one another, so I can definitely see somebody from Sinnoh taking up a gym leader position in Kanto. I honestly don't like Paul, regardless of how much he's changed, so I'm personally unsure about how good he'd be as a gym leader. I mean, that's a fair take. I've seen quite a few people who dislike Paul as a character. He does have some very negative attributes to him. However, I think it's the growth from those negative attributes into positive ones that make him such a good and interesting option for a gym leader. Now, before we wrap up this video, there are a couple things I wanted to add. First is a spoon to the interview portion covering Paul's return in Pokemon Journeys. Credits to Ringo on Twitter for the translation. The interview is with Annie Poke veteran Atsuhiro Tomioka, who's been writing for the show as early as episode 3 of the original series. We spoke to creative supervisor Mr. Kunihiko Yuyama. He said that the battling in this time's Pokemon World Championships and the Masters Tournament would likely reach Ash's pinnacle in the form of a singular battle. Mr. Yuyama always puts pressure on me with stuff like that. But having done the scripts for TV anime Pokemon for 25 years so far, the Pokemon World Championships is a tournament of a pretty grand scale. So it's also in part rewarding for me to have written Ash's pinnacle in the singular battles form. Of course, I made it based on orders that came in and the discussions I had with staff members, but I have written it keeping Ash's battles appealing in mind, and ever since the opening got new visuals, I've been getting reactions from people around me too. Episode 114 will soon be broadcasted. The Blazing Special Training Ash vs Paul was planned to be an episode where Ash goes to Oak's lab before the Masters Tournament to be cheered on by Ash's Pokemon that are there in the original series composition. But I remember making a suggestion that I wish for Ash to attain something else before the battles, not just this. Mr. Yujama suggested let's make Paul appear, and I definitely agreed that having come this far, it could be nobody but Paul. I'm certain fans have great expectations, so we've indicated at what position Paul currently is for them to notice. Is that so? How was it working on episode 114? In the hearts of the viewers, even if their storyline depicted in the anime ends, the characters continue to live in the story's world. I also think there are people who must be wondering, after losing to Ash in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, what became of Paul? Where has he been all this time? I wish to show Paul has matured in a way after a period of time, and in my heart I feel I may have given conclusion to the mutual, youthful rivalry between Ash and Paul. Paul's voice actor, Kiyotaka Furushima, stated, "I was really excited to read the script, and when I actually went to the recording it really hit me that this is Paul's way of life." I'm really happy to hear the voice actor himself say that. Paul is a character that was nurtured over a period of 4 years, and having gained the chance to depict him after that time in the series, and just as his voice actor said it really hit him, Ash and his rivals' dialogue being depicted in episode 114 followed by the opening of the Masters Tournament facing champions and longtime battlers from all regions in a battle was a flow I personally feel was well done structurally. Adding a bit of context for those unfamiliar, Kunihiko Yuyama has been involved with the Pokemon anime since the very beginning and is one of the founding members of OLM, the studio behind the show. Mr. Yujama has been in director roles through most of Anipoki's run and always involved up until Aim to be a Master, so he has worked closely with Tomioka over the years. Tomioka, as mentioned before, has been involved in the anime as well since the beginning, serving as screenplay writer involved in multiple episodes of each Pokemon series. He was also involved in the on-air Team Plasma vs Team Rocket episode. The interview itself touches a lot of what I mentioned of Paul's growth throughout this video, and I'm glad to see Tomioka approach the character with such respect for his history and impact. And that's it for today's discussion. Thanks so much for watching today's video. What are your thoughts? Anything I may have missed? Anything you would like me to cover in the future? I would love to hear it in the comments down below. And if you like our content, please make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. It'll really help us out a lot. You can also follow me on the different social media platforms. This is Alsacia, and I'll catch you later.